The wind came howling down from the high peaks like a living thing, tearing through the timberline, carrying with it shards of ice and the cries of the wilderness. It was the kind of storm that made men stay close to their fires, that buried trails and erased the world beyond one's window. For 3 days it had raged across the Colorado Territory, and in that time, Clara Weston had learned the sound of loneliness. The cabin her father built stood at the edge of a pine grove, its roof heavy with snow. Smoke crawled from the chimney, barely rising before the wind ripped it away. Inside, the girl sat by the fire with her hands clasped, eyes fixed on the door. Her father, Colonel Weston, had ridden out 2 days ago to check his traps near the ridge, promising he'd be back before the storm turned bad. But the storm had turned worse than anyone could have guessed. Now each gust seemed to whisper his name, and each hour that passed made her heart beat faster with worry. The night came early, swallowing the forest in white silence. Clara threw another log on the fire and listened to the hiss and pop of sap. The cabin's corners groaned. The oil lamp flickered. She told herself he was fine. A man like her father had survived worse in the war and on the frontier. Still, she couldn't shake the unease creeping in her chest. Then came the sound, faint at first, almost lost in the wind. A heavy, uneven step, followed by another. She froze. No animal walked like that. The footsteps grew louder, dragging through the snow until they stopped right outside the door. The latch rattled once, twice, her heart thudded in her ears. The rifle leaned by the hearth and she snatched it up, hands trembling. The door pushed inward, letting in a blast of freezing air and snow, and a figure filled the threshold, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in torn hides. The stranger stumbled forward, the door slamming shut behind him under the weight of the storm. Clara took a step back, raising the rifle. "Don't move!" she cried. The man didn't move, because he couldn't. His dark eyes flickered open for a second, meeting hers. They were deep and strange, the color of burnt amber. Then his knees buckled and he fell face first to the floor. For a long moment she stood frozen, staring down at him. His skin was darker than any white man's she'd ever seen, his hair long and black as a raven's wing. A necklace of bone hung around his neck, half broken, and the hides he wore were stitched with beads and feathers. Recognition hit her like a shock. Apache. Her first thought was to drag him outside, to bolt the door and pray the storm took him. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Never trust one of them, Clara. They'd sooner slit your throat than thank you." But then she saw the blood. A dark stain spread across his chest, seeping through the leather. The wound wasn't fresh and it had frozen around the edges, crusted with snow. He'd been hurt for hours, maybe days, and somehow survived long enough to reach her cabin. Her breath came fast. He was half dead. Clara dropped the rifle and knelt beside him. His skin was cold as stone, his pulse faint but steady beneath her fingers. For all the warnings she'd ever been given, for all the fear her father had planted in her heart, she couldn't bring herself to let him die. She dragged him, inch by inch, toward the fire. His body was heavy with exhaustion, and it took nearly all her strength to pull him close enough to feel the heat. She stripped off his frozen coat and found a bullet wound low in his side. It had been cleaned crudely, but not well enough. Infection had begun to set in. She boiled water, tore up an old linen sheet, and worked in silence, her hands shaking as she washed the wound. He stirred once, mumbling something in a tongue she couldn't understand. She hushed him, whispering soft nonsense the way she would to a frightened animal. By the time she finished, the storm had swallowed the world outside. The shutters banged, the chimney moaned, but inside there was warmth again. The glow of the fire, the rhythm of breath, the faint scent of pine and smoke. She sat back and studied him. He was young, maybe no older than 30, though his face was carved with hardship. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, lips that might have once known laughter. There was something about him that unsettled her, not in fear but in curiosity. She'd never seen a man so proud even in unconsciousness, as if he belonged to the land itself. When dawn came, the light crept across the floorboards, turning the frost on the window into diamonds. Clara hadn't slept. The man stirred, groaning softly. His eyes opened again, focusing on her. "Where?" His voice was low, roughened by thirst. "You're safe," she said quickly. "You're in my cabin." "The storm? You were nearly frozen." He blinked, looking around, confusion giving way to understanding. "You saved me," she hesitated. "You needed help." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "My name is Taza." "Clara," she replied. He tried to sit up, grimaced, and sank back down. "You should not have helped me. Your people will not like this." A flicker of fear ran through her. "My father, he's not home. He doesn't—" Taza's eyes softened slightly. "Then you are brave, Clara Weston." The sound of her name in his voice made her stomach twist in a strange way. He spoke English, but his words carried a rhythm, a calm certainty she'd never heard before. She busied herself with tending the fire, trying to hide the flush in her cheeks. "You should rest. The snow's not letting up any time soon." For the rest of that day, she brought him broth and kept the fire alive. He spoke little, though when he did, she listened. Stories of the mountains, of spirits that walked the ridges, of rivers that remembered names. She didn't know if they were legends or truths, but something about them felt older than anything her father's books ever told. Outside, the world was white and silent. Inside, something fragile began to stir, an understanding neither of them had expected. That night, when she laid another fur over him and his hand brushed hers by accident, she pulled away, as if burned. But the warmth lingered long after, and when she finally drifted to sleep curled in a chair by the fire, she didn't dream of her father or the storm. She dreamed of dark eyes under falling snow, and a voice that said her name like it meant something more than it ever had before. The storm finally broke 2 days later. The morning sun rose cold and sharp, turning the world outside into a glittering sea of white. The mountains, once swallowed by the blizzard, stood tall again, their peaks crowned in light. But inside the Weston cabin, time seemed to slow, stretched thin between silence and the sound of two people who shouldn't have met, yet had. Clara Weston moved about the room with quiet purpose, feeding the fire, setting a pot of water to boil, pretending not to notice that the man lying near the hearth was watching her. He didn't stare the way rough men in town did. His gaze was thoughtful, almost patient, like he was seeing not just her, but something through her, something he was trying to understand. Taza's wound had begun to heal, though every movement still cost him effort. He'd wrapped it himself now, using strips of leather instead of her torn linens. When she offered to help him rebind it, he shook his head. "You've done enough," he said softly. She didn't answer, but she stayed near. It felt strange having him there. A man her father would have shot on sight, now sitting at her fire, speaking in a low voice that carried a steadiness she found almost soothing. Taza spoke little of himself at first. His English was careful, shaped by thought before sound. But each time he spoke, she felt the walls of her world shift a little more. He told her he'd been raised near the Rio Puerco, that his people once roamed freely across the land before treaties and soldiers had forced them into corners of the desert. His father had been a chief, a man of peace who'd tried to build bridges between the Apache and the settlers. But peace was fragile in those days, and one broken promise could turn a valley into a graveyard. Clara listened in silence. She'd heard the other side of those stories all her life, tales of raids and massacres, of farmers slain and cabins burned. She'd believed them without question. Yet when she looked at Taza, she saw no monster, no bloodthirsty savage. She saw a man who had lost everything, but still carried himself with a dignity that made her ashamed of her own ignorance. When she finally asked how he'd been shot, his eyes turned toward the window where sunlight spilled across the floorboards. "Bounty hunters," he said. "They came for gold. Said I killed a settler in the San Juan Valley, but the man they spoke of, he still lives. So why do they hunt you?" she asked. Taza gave a small, humorless smile. "Because the truth does not buy bullets, Clara Weston. Lies do." His words lingered long after he'd fallen silent. She found herself replaying them while she mended her father's coat, while she stirred the soup, while she sat by the fire pretending not to glance his way. That evening, as the wind softened and the forest began to breathe again, Clara brought him a tin cup of broth and sat across from him on the floor. "My father says people have to draw lines," she said quietly. "He says if you don't, this land'll swallow you whole." Taza looked at her, his face unreadable. "Maybe the land doesn't swallow us," he said. "Maybe we swallow it. Cut it, fence it, name it, until there's nothing left for anyone to share." His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, almost sad. Clara lowered her eyes. She'd never thought of it that way. The West was something her father had always described as empty, waiting to be claimed. But hearing Taza speak, she realized it had never been empty at all. For a while, neither of them spoke. The firelight painted the cabin in gold and shadow, flickering across the walls. Clara became aware of the stillness between them, a strange, heavy silence that made her pulse quicken. "You speak as if you've lost something," she said finally. Taza's gaze softened. "I have lost everything," he replied. "My people scattered. My father dead. The mountains are full of ghosts. I'm sorry," she whispered. He studied her face. "Do not be sorry. The snow falls the same on every man, white or red. We both live beneath the same sky." His words warmed something inside her that the fire couldn't touch. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing from the hearth. Her thoughts tangled like wind in the pines. She knew she should be afraid. Her father's voice echoed in every corner of her mind, yet she wasn't. Instead, she felt an ache she couldn't name, something caught between curiosity and longing. At dawn, she found him outside, leaning weakly against the porch rail, staring at the snow-covered valley below. The air bit cold, the horizon pink and gold. "You shouldn't be up," she said, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. He smiled faintly. "I have slept too long. I needed to see the sky." She stepped beside him. The view stretched endless on white pines, ridges, and the faint line of smoke from a settler's chimney far off. "When I was a child," Taza said, "my father told me the mountains are the bones of the earth. He said they remember everything that happens upon them. Sometimes I wonder what they remember of us." Clara followed his gaze. "Maybe they remember the good things too. Maybe," he murmured, though his eyes looked far away. They stood in silence, the cold biting through cloth, the moment tender in its simplicity. Clara realized how natural it felt being beside him. There was no fear in her heart anymore, only a strange sense of belonging. When the wind picked up, she turned to go back inside, but Taza caught her wrist lightly. His touch was gentle, reverent. "Clara," he said quietly, "you should not be near me. When the snow melts, I must go. The men who hunt me, they will not stop." "I know," she said, her throat tight, "but you're safe here for now." He looked at her for a long moment, then let go. "You have a brave heart," he said. "Too brave for the world we live in." That night, as the snow melted and the streams began to run again, Taza sat near the fire, carving something from a piece of cedar he'd found in the woodpile. Clara watched him from her chair, pretending to read. When he finished, he handed it to her, a small wooden pendant shaped like a hawk. "In my people's tongue," he said, "the hawk means freedom. You should wear it when you need courage." Clara's fingers brushed his as she took it. The world outside vanished. There was only the sound of the fire, the beating of her heart, and his gaze holding hers. For one wild moment, she thought he might lean forward. The thought terrified and thrilled her all at once. But he only smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that made her feel seen in a way she never had before. The line between them had blurred. When she finally lay down that night, the pendant rested against her chest, warm from his hands. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, gentle as breath, and though she didn't understand it yet, Clara Weston was no longer the same girl who had opened her cabin door to a wounded stranger. She was caught now, between two worlds. One of duty and blood, the other of heart and spirit. And she knew deep down that when the snow melted for good, nothing would ever be simple again. The snow had thinned by the time Colonel Weston came riding down from the ridge, his horse breaking through the last crust of winter. The storm had stripped the mountains bare, leaving the pines bowed and silent beneath a cold sun. He'd been gone nearly a week, longer than he'd planned, and the thought of his daughter waiting alone in the cabin had gnawed at him through every mile of frozen trail. Clara Weston was all he had left in the world. Her mother had died in Kansas, struck down during one of those border skirmishes the soldiers never liked to talk about. Killed by Apaches, the report said. Weston had carried that truth like a bullet in his heart ever since. So when he finally saw the smoke curling from their chimney, relief flooded through him, though it was quickly followed by something harder: suspicion. The mountains had a way of teaching a man that safety never came easy. He tied his horse to the post, stomped snow from his boots, and pushed open the door. The first thing he saw was his daughter standing by the fire. The second thing was the man. The stranger sat near the hearth, broad-shouldered and still pale from injury. His dark hair fell over his brow, his eyes calm but watchful. The colonel's instincts snapped to life. His hand went straight to the rifle slung over his shoulder. "Clara," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Step away from him." She turned, startled but not afraid. "But wait, please." Weston didn't wait. He leveled the rifle at the man's chest. "Who are you, and what the hell are you doing in my cabin?" The Apache rose slowly to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his side. "My name is Taza," he said. "Your daughter saved my life." The words struck Weston like a hammer. "Saved your life?" His voice was thick with disbelief and fury. "You mean she took in an Apache?" He turned on Clara, his face red. "Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what these people have done?" Clara's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. "He was hurt. He would have died in the snow." "Good," Weston spat. "That's where his kind belongs." Taza's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. His dark eyes stayed locked on the older man, steady and unyielding. "I did not come here to bring harm," he said. "I was hunted, shot, by white men who wanted gold, not justice. Your daughter showed mercy, that is all." "Mercy?" Weston barked a bitter laugh. "Mercy's what got my wife killed." The room went still. Clara's heart twisted at the sound of her mother's ghost between them. "Pa!" she whispered, but he didn't hear her. His eyes were glass-hard, fixed on the man before him as if looking at every loss, every nightmare, every sleepless night since Kansas. Taza didn't flinch. "I am sorry for what you lost," he said quietly. "But your hate will not bring her back." The words hung in the air like smoke. Weston's finger twitched against the trigger. Clara stepped between them, her hands outstretched. "Please stop. He's not our enemy." Her father's voice cracked with anger. "You don't know what you're saying. They murdered your mother, Clara." She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "Not him. You can't punish one man for what others did. He's not a killer, he's—" Her voice faltered, but the truth was already there in her face. Weston saw it, the softness in her eyes, the way she looked at the Apache. And in that instant, something inside him turned cold as the snow outside. "My God," he said, lowering the rifle slightly. "You care for him?" Clara said nothing. She didn't have to. The colonel's voice dropped to a growl. "Get him out of my house, now." "Pa, he's still hurt. I said out." Weston roared, the sound shaking the rafters. Taza's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once, like a man who understood there was no arguing with hate older than time. He turned toward Clara. "The storm is gone. I can walk now." She moved toward him, desperate. "You don't have to go like this." But he stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You gave me life, Clara Weston. That is more than I can repay." Her eyes filled with tears. "Where will you go?" "Where the wind allows." His smile was small, almost sad. "Do not be afraid for me." The colonel watched in silence as the Apache stepped to the door, the morning light spilling across him. For one fleeting second, Weston saw not a savage, but a man, proud, wounded, and strangely noble. But he crushed the thought as quickly as it came. Taza paused at the door and looked back once more. "Colonel," he said quietly, "the world you fight for will not last if it is built on hate." Then he was gone, stepping out into the snow. Clara stood staring at the empty doorway until her father's voice broke the silence. "You've shamed this family," he said flatly, her hands clenched. "No, Pa, I saved a man's life." "That's not shame, and that's decency." "Decency?" Weston spat the word like poison. "He'd have slit your throat the second you turned your back." She turned on him then, her face fierce through the tears. "You didn't see his eyes, Pa. You didn't hear how he spoke about his people, about the land. He's not what you think." He slammed the rifle butt on the floor. "Enough. I'll not have my daughter talking like some Indian sympathizer under my roof." The fight went out of her. She sank into the chair by the fire, staring at the flames that only hours ago had warmed Taza's hands. The air still carried his scent: smoke, pine, leather. The pendant he'd carved for her hung from her neck, hidden beneath her dress. She pressed it in her palm, feeling the shape of the hawk, its wings spread in silent flight. Her father's boots thudded across the floor as he poured himself a tin of whiskey. "He's gone now," he muttered. "You'll forget him soon enough." But she wouldn't. She couldn't. When night fell, she stood at the door, looking out across the white hills under the moon. She imagined Taza walking through that endless silence, wounded and alone. every breath a struggle against the cold. The thought cut deeper than anything her father had said. She wanted to call out, to run after him, to do something, but the fear of breaking her father's heart kept her frozen. Yet even as she turned back inside, a promise burned quietly in her chest, the kind that no man's anger could snuff out. She didn't know if she'd ever see him again, but she knew with a certainty that frightened her, that her life no longer belonged only to the world her father built. It belonged to the wild, to the snow, the wind, and to the man who had walked out into it. And somewhere beyond the ridge, under the cold stars, the Apache warrior carried her memory with him, a light in the endless white. Spring came late that year. The snow melted slow from the ridges, feeding the rivers until they ran wild with silver. The world outside Clara Weston's window was waking again. Robins in the pines, thawed streams whispering through the valleys, sunlight spilling over the high country. But inside the cabin there was only silence. Since the day Taza had walked into the storm, Clara's father hadn't spoken much to her. He went about his chores like a man walking through a dream, mending traps, chopping wood, polishing the same rifle over and over. The quiet between them had grown heavy, and Clara bore it like a chain. She wore her mother's apron, tended to the fire, smiled when spoken to. But her mind was far away. Each morning, she found herself glancing toward the pass where the mountains met the sky, hoping for a glimpse of movement. Sometimes she thought she saw a shadow against the ridgeline, tall, proud, walking with that unmistakable gait, but it always vanished into the mist. Then, one afternoon, word came down from town. A peddler stopped at the homestead, his horse loaded with supplies and gossip. Over supper he mentioned it, as casually as a man might mention the weather. Bounty men been prowling up near the high pass, he said, between bites of bread. Looking for that Apache fugitive again. They say he's been seen near the San Juan Creek. Clara's spoon froze halfway to her mouth. An Apache? She asked quietly. The peddler nodded. A tall one rides alone. Reckon he's the same fella that slipped the posse back in February. Her father grunted. Serves him right if they find him. Should have finished the job last time. Clara excused herself from the table before her voice could betray her. She stepped outside, the cold wind cutting against her cheeks, her heart pounding. He was alive, but if bounty hunters were near, he wouldn't be for long. That night she couldn't sleep. The pendant around her neck felt heavier than ever, its carved hawk pressing against her heart like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. By dawn, she had made up her mind. She packed a small bag, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, her father's rifle, and saddled the mare while the first light crept through the trees. She hesitated once, looking back at the cabin. Inside, her father still slept, his dreams probably haunted by a world he couldn't forgive. "Forgive me too," she whispered. Then she mounted and rode toward the mountains. The trail wound through pines heavy with meltwater, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. Every hoofbeat echoed through her bones. She rode for hours, guided by instinct more than direction, until she found the creek the peddler had mentioned, swollen with snowmelt, rushing wild through a narrow gorge. That's when she heard the gunfire. 2 sharp cracks split the air, followed by shouts. She spurred her horse forward, heart hammering. The trail bent sharply, and she saw them. 3 bounty hunters on horseback, rifles raised, circling a figure crouched by the rocks. Even from a distance, she knew him. Taza. He was cornered, wounded again, blood marking the snow where he'd fallen. His bow was gone, his knife dull with frost. The hunters were closing in, their laughter cruel and confident. Without thinking, Clara lifted the rifle and fired. The shot rang through the gorge, startling the horses. One of the men cursed, ducking for cover. She fired again, and this time her bullet shattered the branch above them, sending snow tumbling down. "Taza," she shouted. He looked up, disbelief crossing his face as he saw her charging down the slope. "Ride," she cried, "now." Taza didn't hesitate. He swung onto his horse, grimacing from pain, and together they tore down the pass. Bullets whistling past, ricocheting off rock. The wind whipped her hair, the cold biting her lungs, but she didn't stop. Not until the shouts behind them faded into silence and only the sound of pounding hooves filled the valley. They rode until the sun dipped low, until both horses stumbled with exhaustion. At last they stopped in a narrow canyon where the air was still and the snow hadn't yet melted. Clara slid from her saddle, shaking. Her hands were raw, her breath ragged. Taza dismounted slowly, pressing a hand to his side where blood darkened his shirt. "You're hurt," she said, rushing to him. He caught her wrist gently. "It's nothing. You should not have come." "I couldn't stay," she whispered. "They would have killed you." His gaze softened. "Then I should have died." "You risked everything, Clara Weston." She shook her head. "You don't understand. I couldn't let you go again." For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the wind sighing through the canyon. Taza looked at her, really looked, and whatever walls had been left between them crumbled. He stepped closer, his hand brushing her cheek. "You are not like them," he murmured. She felt tears sting her eyes. "And you are not what they say." He leaned in, and for the first time his lips found hers. The kiss was slow, hesitant, not the wild kind born of passion, but the kind born of survival, of gratitude, of something deeper than either had words for. The world around them seemed to stop. When they finally pulled apart, the sky above had turned to fire, pink, gold, and red streaking the peaks. They built a small fire in a shallow cave that night using dry twigs and bark. The smoke curled lazily upward, vanishing into the cracks of the rock. Clara bandaged his wound again, her fingers gentle but firm. He watched her in silence, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "You saved me twice," he said softly. "You would have done the same," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but your father will not forgive this." "I know," she said, "but I'm not his little girl anymore." He reached out and took her hand, rough fingers enclosing hers. "When I was a child, my father said love is a path between two fires. It burns you, but it also lights your way." Clara looked into the flames. "Then maybe we're walking that path now." He nodded slowly. "And if the fire takes us? Then we'll burn together." Outside, the snow fell again, light as feathers, melting as it touched the ground. By dawn, they were ready to move. The danger wasn't gone. The bounty hunters would come again, but for that single night in that forgotten canyon, the world had been theirs alone. No settlers, no tribes, no hate. Just two souls caught in the same storm. When Taza saddled his horse, he turned to her. "There is a valley south of here," he said, "hidden by the mountains. My people once called it Shashdu. It means the quiet place. I dream of building peace there, someday, where our children do not grow up with blood on their hands." Clara smiled, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "Then we'll find it." But both of them knew the world wouldn't let them have it easily. As they rode toward the rising sun, the wind carried their trail away, two sets of hoofprints side by side fading into the white. The dawn came gray and heavy, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Clara Weston rode beside Taza through the thinning mist, their horses moving slow but steady down the slope toward the Weston cabin. It had been 2 nights since they'd escaped the bounty hunters, 2 nights spent in the cold wilderness with only fire and trust between them. Now the sun rose faint and distant behind a bank of clouds, casting pale light over the valley. Clara's heart ached with every step their horses took closer to home. She knew what waited there, her father's anger, his fear, his rifle. Yet there was no other place left to go. Taza's wound needed tending, and they could not keep running forever. The closer they drew, the quieter the world became. The cabin appeared at last through the trees, its chimney sending a thin stream of smoke into the morning air. Her stomach twisted at the sight. Taza slowed his horse, his voice low. "You should go first. Your father will not take kindly to me." Clara shook her head. "If I go in alone, he'll think I've been taken. He needs to see the truth, that I came back by choice." Taza looked at her then, his gaze soft but full of warning. "The truth is not what he wants to see, Clara." "I know," she whispered. "But I have to try." She slid from the saddle, boots sinking into the damp earth. Every sound seemed too loud. The creak of leather, the soft jingle of the reins. She took a deep breath, gathering courage, and walked toward the door. Before she could knock, it swung open. Colonel Weston stood there, unshaven and sleepless, a rifle in his hands. His eyes widened when he saw her, then narrowed when he noticed the man behind her. "Clara?" His voice was a mixture of disbelief and dread. "Where the hell have you been?" "Pa, please." He stepped out onto the porch, his boots crunching in the frost. "You went after him, didn't you?" She didn't answer, but the silence was enough. His gaze snapped past her, locking on Taza like a predator's. "You brought him back?" Weston growled. After everything I told you? He saved my life, Clara said, stepping between them. And I saved his. We just need shelter, Pa. He's hurt. Weston raised the rifle. Get away from him, Clara. She shook her head, tears brimming. No. Damn it, girl, move. Taza dismounted slowly, holding his hands out to show he carried no weapon. His face was calm, but Clara could see the tension in his jaw, the quiet readiness of a man who'd seen death before. I do not wish to harm you, he said evenly. I came only because your daughter wished it. When she leaves, I will go. You'll leave now, Weston snapped, leveling the rifle. Pa, please, Clara begged. You're not listening. I've heard enough, he barked. You think I'll let a killer stand on my land? After what his kind did to your mother? The words struck like a blade. Clara's heart clenched. You can't keep punishing the whole world for what happened, Pa. You can't. Her father's voice broke. You weren't there, Clara. You didn't see what they did. Taza's voice cut through the air, low and firm. I know your pain, Colonel. I have buried family too. But hate has taken more from you than the war ever did. You think this rifle keeps you safe? It keeps you alone. Weston's hands trembled around the gun. For a long moment, no one moved. The frost shimmered on the ground. The horses shifted nervously, and the mountain stood silent behind them. Then Clara stepped forward, between the barrel of the rifle and the man she loved. Her father's eyes widened. Clara, don't you dare. If you shoot him, she said softly, you'll have to shoot me too. The silence that followed was the kind that pressed on a man's soul. The colonel's face twisted, torn between rage and heartbreak. He looked at his daughter and his only child, standing before the man he hated most. Her chin high, her eyes clear. For the first time in years, he saw her not as the little girl he'd protected, but as a woman who had made her own choice. The rifle lowered, slowly shaking all the while. Clara, his voice cracked. You don't understand what this means. Yes, I do, she said. It means I love him. Weston flinched as if struck. The words hung in the cold air, final and unbreakable. He turned away, the weight of years settling on his shoulders. The world will eat you alive for it, he muttered. Both of you. Then let it, she whispered. The old soldier's breath came heavy. He looked down at the rifle in his hands, then back at Taza, whose eyes held no defiance, only quiet strength. Slowly, painfully, Weston lowered the gun all the way until its butt rested on the ground. I don't understand you, he said to his daughter, but maybe I don't have to. Then he looked at Taza. If you hurt her, I would die before I did, Taza said simply. The colonel nodded once. Then take her. The land's hard enough without fightin' love too. Clara ran to him, tears streaming. He held up a hand. Go, before I change my mind. She turned back to Taza, who waited by the horses, the morning sun breaking through the clouds behind him. For a long second she looked at her father, the man who'd raised her, who'd loved her fiercely but too often through the language of fear. Goodbye, Pa, she whispered. He didn't answer. He just watched her go. Taza reached out a hand, helping her mount. Together they rode toward the open country, where the snow was melting into green. The sun climbed higher, the world brightening with it. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller until it was just a shadow at the foot of the mountains. Clara looked over her shoulder one last time and saw her father still standing on the porch, rifle in hand but no longer aimed at anyone. For the first time he seemed smaller, softer. A man left behind by the world he'd fought so hard to shape. When she faced forward again, the wind caught her hair and the pendant at her throat glinted in the sun. Taza glanced at her, his expression gentle. He let you go? No, she said quietly, smiling through her tears. He let us go. They rode until the land opened wide before them, hills rolling like waves, rivers cutting through the green, and beyond it all, the vast sky stretching without end. Somewhere, out there was the valley Taza had spoken of, Shashda, the quiet place. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Clara Weston felt no fear. She reached across and took his hand. The Apache warrior squeezed it gently, the same strength and calm that had once frightened her now grounding her like the earth beneath them. Behind them, a father watched the dawn rise over his land, the rifle hanging forgotten by his side. Ahead, two riders disappeared into the golden light, bound not by blood or duty, but by a love strong enough to silence even the ghosts of war. And in the quiet of that Colorado morning, the mountains seemed to breathe again, no longer witnesses to hate but keepers of a new beginning.